Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Charles Sterling. I'm here almost every week doing these daily webinars or these weekly webinars here with an old friend. Turns out we're an old friend and we didn't know it. It's like a bad French movie. I've been interacting with Ted not virtually, almost. What is it when you're actually really close to interacting with somebody but not quite? What's that term called, Ted?
Peer?
Yeah, peer. So he turns out we're both .NET cronies. We've actually been playing the .NET space, even COM. We actually did some old COM stuff together, but we never interacted directly until Power BI brought us together. So Power BI brings people together. And since we're old dev guys, we both gravitated towards actually using it as a development platform. Ted's a lot better at this than me, and he's actually been teaching classes on it. He helped me out the last year's Microsoft Data Insight Summit. Hopefully he'll be helping us out again in this year's Business Applications Data Insight Summit with some developer topics. And he's going to walk us through what's new and exciting for April for the developer, specifically around embedded. So what do you got going for us? But before you talk, I want you to start sharing your screen. And then I'm going to hand you the microphone. And once they actually can see the slide, we can see your slide. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Ted? I know who you are, but I don't think anybody here does. And what is this critical path training thing? And how do I find out more about training on this exciting topic?
Well, my name is Ted Pattison. Like you, I'm a kind of a rusty, elderly dinosaur that's been around. I've been training for a little bit over 20 years. I trained during the COM, the Component Object Model days, for a company called Develop Mentor. I trained SharePoint for my company, Critical Path Training. And now that SharePoint's not quite as exciting from a training perspective as it was 7 or 8 years ago, Power BI is the new hot ticket. So I've just gotten really invested in Power BI. Critical Path Training is a company that focuses on Power BI, Power Apps Flow, and pretty much everything that's kind of coming out of the business application platform. And I've just done a lot of development work over the years. So as I worked with SharePoint, kind of my leg up on some of the other people who are SharePoint experts is, I had a good development background, and I'm kind of bringing the same thing into Power BI. Okay, that's enough of me selling myself. You said wonderful things about me, but I have to say that you are a snappier dresser than I am.
I'm actually wearing shirts I got when I was visiting you and staying at your house in Tampa. This is a Florida shirt that I'm wearing, so thank you.
Well, super. So do you want me to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the TED Show. Make it happen.
Okay, so
I think we just lost Ted. I don't know what Ted just did, but hopefully he's going to be rejoining us. While we're waiting for Ted to rejoin us, I'm going to.
Am I back?
He is back. Ted is back. Okay, good.
Okay. This new Google Live Events thing, just getting used to. You can see my screen now. I take it. And
yeah,
if I move my slides.
Yes. And
okay. So I meant to start my PowerPoint slide deck, and maybe it was the same keystroke as jumping out of that meeting. Okay. So what we're going to look at here, don't do that. First of all, I'm going to show a bunch of code samples, and there is a place that you can go to. Let me move over here to the browser, and note that if you move over to the Power BI embedded, it's a GitHub repository. I have the links there on the slide, that you're going to be able to get the code samples, and the slides that I'm showing inside here. For instance, github.com, critical path training, and this is Power BI embedded. So here are some slide decks that we have. Here's the slide deck that I'm going to show today. And in demos, the two demos that I'm going to be showing are the Daily Reporter Pro. I've showed that before, and I have a brand new one called the Power BI Embedded Scratchpad that hopefully many of you will see the value of. Okay, now I've given this talk back a couple times, and there's some videos. So I'm going to go through the first part of the slide deck pretty quick, just because there's older ones that take more time to go through. So we're going to be working with the Power BI service. As you know, the Power BI service provides access to your typical business user through the browser, through app.powerbi.com. If you use the mobile apps, they also go through the Power BI service. But us developers, we also have an ability to call into a web service, that we know as the Power BI Service API. Now, the Power BI Service API has gone by other names. Sometimes people might call it the Power BI REST API because when it was first released, it was only available through REST. but now you can either deal with it through REST or you can use a .NET DLL, which is known as the Power BI SDK. So whether you call it the Power BI Service API and Chuck calls it the Power BI REST API and Billy Bob calls it the Power BI API, same thing. Now, when we use this, once again, I can either make direct REST calls, against the service, or I could use a friendly assembly DLL. Now, there are plenty of things that still are available through direct REST calls that aren't available through the DLL yet. However, when we get to Power BI embedding, that's what they focused on, is basically giving me all the things that I need to basically get back the data about reports and dashboards and tiles, so I can actually do embedding. Now, there's a NuGet package that you can add, into Visual Studio style applications. And another thing that gets to be important about working with the Power BI Service API is that it is a Azure-based web service that requires that you authenticate with Azure Active Directory. So going through the Azure Active Directory authentication library, using something like C# is what I'm going to be using. It's a pretty good amount of background, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But that's something that you're going to have to learn how to bandwidth if you haven't already kind of gotten used to that. Now, let's start with a big picture. You create a web application, you want to use Power BI embedding. So we make a call, and then you have code that's running on the server, typically. Doesn't have to, but let's say we have server-side code that's going to do our work. So the first thing that we have to do is call into Azure Active Directory so we can authenticate the user and get a special type of security token known as an Azure AD access token. Now, we need the Azure AD access token so we can call into the Power BI service. And once we call into the Power BI service, we can basically get back data. So when I want to embed a report, I call into the Power BI service and I basically say, I need details about this report, the GUID that identifies it. We also have something called an embed URL that we're going to see. And then we need some kind of a security token. And it's possible just to use the Azure AD security token, but it's also possible to call into the Power BI service and get a more restricted token, which is known as an embed token. But once we get the data, we push it back into the browser. And then the final step, once you have the data to embed something, is we're going to use something which is called the Power BI JavaScript API. Now, what happens when we do this dance where we do the embedding is we simply have a div in our page, and I'll make a simple call into this Power BI JavaScript API. Behind the scenes, it will create an iframe, and it has to kind of do some nasty, dirty work of taking a security token and passing it across the iframe boundary. So, that's a low-level post-message call. Luckily, we're shielded from all that. But at the end of the day, what happens is the embedded object comes up in the iframe, and now there's a direct connection between the user's browser and the Power BI service. So as someone clicks on a slicer to start drilling down on data, it never has to route back through your application. Okay, now there's two important kinds of embedding. And depending on your type of project, you have to figure that out which one you're going to use. First party embedding says we're going to authenticate the current user and then use the access token created on behalf of that user to do our work. Now, with first party embedding, if you have 100 users, you have basically 100 different identities that you're calling in with. So you're always calling in with the identity of the current user. So when we do this, all the users are going to require a Power BI license. And what we're going to see is that the users also have to have Azure Active Directory accounts. If I use the term Office 365 account, that's really an account that's created in Azure AD. Now, once you get the access token for a particular user, your code has access to whatever that user has access to, but no more. Now, there's also third-party embedding. So with third-party embedding, we have lots of different users, but we're not going to authenticate them and use any type of security token we received against the Power BI service. Instead, if we have 100 users, we have one user account. And as you're going to see, we're basically going to hard code a username and password, into our application, but it's going to call into the Power BI service, using this master account. So your code has access to anything the master account has access to. And instead of using the very powerful access token that the master user has, and remember, the master user is going to be an administrator of the target app workspace, we're going to create a restricted token, which is known as an embed token. So we're going to use special tokens. And what's nice about that is users don't need to have Azure Active Directory accounts. Users might have never even heard of Office 365, and they don't have to have any Power BI licenses. So your master account has a Power BI Pro license, but that's all that you have. And your code then has access to whatever the master account has access to. Now, as far as first party versus third party embedding, for first party, it's for organizations where everybody already has some type of Office 365 or Azure AD account, and all the users have Power BI licenses, whether that's the free license or the pro license, that depends. Okay. And you also might have reports that you've created in Power BI that you're embedding in other applications like SharePoint or Microsoft Teams or Dynamics 365. But realize that users already have the Power BI service, and that gives us a pretty good way for users to get at data. So we really kind of have to go beyond the out-of-the-box experience of what the Power BI service browser experience brings, before you have motivation to do some type of custom application with first-party embedding. Now, when it comes to third,
we didn't go through this earlier.
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Did you want to take questions? Did you, or did you want to take them at the end? I know that you got a lot of content.
Why don't I let you filter what you think are the most important questions coming in? Okay. Or maybe a question every 5 minutes or so.
Okay. So I think it was Vinay. No, it was PMDSCI wanted to know if you could actually contrast and compare the advantages of using a master account versus first party. And you're right there right now. So that's his question.
Yeah. So the benefit of using the master account is that your users don't need to have accounts. So no one has a Power BI license. Imagine that you're an accounting shop, and for 5 years, you've been taking users who are your customers, and you have a SQL database with their usernames and passwords. So they're not Azure Active Directory accounts. You can't assign them licenses. Still, you want to go and embed reports on their behalf. So if an application has a custom identity provider that has nothing to do with Azure Active Directory, it's basically going to give us, the ability to still reach those users. So really, the master user account and third-party embedding is really for ISVs and commercially facing applications. Okay. Hopefully that gives you kind of a good explanation of that. Once again, Chuck, I'll just kind of let you make your best judgment call about, when to throw questions out there.
Made perfect sense, and I think that answered it. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to show a application, and note that if you're writing C# code and you're using .NET, so I'm going to show, first of all, an ASP.NET MVC application. Then I'm going to show a console application. And both of them are using the Azure Active Directory Authentication Library. So that's what we see on top right here. And then what we have below is the DLL that wraps the Microsoft or the Power BI Service API. Okay. And then also for this application I'm about to show, the very bottom one is the Power BI JavaScript API. It's just a .js file that you link into your pages that you write a little JavaScript program against. Okay, now let's go ahead, and before I jump into the details, let's go over and kind of take a look at this application. So I have things like the client ID and app workspace inside here. I'll explain a little bit more what those are, but I'm just going to go ahead and start up this application just to kind of show you what it looks like. So here's an example of an application where I allow the user to go and see the different reports. What's kind of nice about that is that my custom application is reaching into an app workspace. If we go back over here, let's say that I go back and I take one of the reports and I open this report up. Let's do a save as, and this will be demo 1, 2, 3. And now that I've done that, let's go back to my application here, and let's just go ahead and refresh. So what's kind of neat about that is that whoever's maintaining the reports and the dashboards, can basically just do it through the browser like they do for any type of, Power BI app workspace inside there. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to allow this user to, click on this particular link. And what my app is going to do here is basically going to load it in. And any second now, we should see basically our report loading in. Okay, so just a quick example of getting a report up and going in the browser. Okay, but wait, there's more. Not only can you embed the report in read-only mode, you can actually allow the user to go into edit mode, and we can embed the whole report designer. And we're allowed to, basically have our users, who can go and, make changes to things, and these changes can be saved back, if I want to give the user permissions to basically get into edit mode. So if you open up a report and your embed token allows just view, you can't save back. If you open it up and you allow edit, you can basically make your changes and save them back. Okay, so that was just a kind of a quick look at, what the application that you build might look like. Now, a couple details. In order to use third-party embedding, and we're going to focus on this talk mainly on third-party embedding that ISVs will be interested in. Well, everything we're going to do is going to involve working with an app workspace. So nothing's going to go in a personal workspace. We are going to create an app workspace, and we're basically going to start filling it up with data sets, reports, dashboards inside there. Okay. Now, when the app workspace is being used for third-party embedding, you basically need to have some type of dedicated capacity. Now, in the past, this was strictly the case. What's happened lately is that Microsoft has kind of relaxed things a bit. So if you have a Power BI environment, you've created a tenant and you don't have Power BI Premium or Power BI Embedded, you can still get a limited number of embed tokens, what they think is reasonable, for a developer, not a production application to be using. Now, another important thing is that you're going to have a master user account. Let's go back inside here and go to Edit Workspace. Your master user account is going to have to be set up as an admin of that app workspace for this to work. Okay. And then also, what you're going to see is that you'll create the app workspaces, and the master user account has to be an admin, has to have a Power BI Pro account. And then if you want, you can have other members of the app workspace that are uploading reports or publishing reports to Power BI Desktop, and also creating dashboards through the browser. Now, let's talk about dedicated capacities. So one way to get a dedicated capacity is to basically buy Power BI Premium. You've probably seen some things about that. Let me go ahead and jump over here. And what I'm going to do is I have Power BI, great. And I'm going to go down to the admin portal. When I go down to the admin portal, I'm going to go to capacity settings. So the idea here is if you have the financial luxury, you're like someone like Charles, who basically can spend $5,000 a month for no good reason, or for probably really good reasons. If you can't buy Power BI Premium, there's going to be nothing here. Okay. But what I want to show you is, how about Power BI Embedded? So let's go back here into Azure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, create a new resource. And when I create this new resource inside here, one of my options is going to be a Power BI embedded service. So basically, we're going to create a service on demand. Let's go ahead and type Power BI inside here. Now, there's the new, good, wholesome embedded service. That's what we have right here, Power BI Embedded. And then there's the old one, which you should never use anymore. So if you see Workspace Collection, that's the old one that got retired. So we want to create one based on the new service inside here. So now that I've done that, let's go ahead and choose Create. And so for this, let's go ahead and kind of create something simple inside here. Now, it does take, 5 minutes or so to spin one of these up. So I've already created one ahead of time, but just to give you a quick glimpse, let's say that I come inside here and I create my capacity, and I create, my capacity 46, and it likes that name. And then I'll go ahead and put this in a particular resource group inside there. And now we have the pricing tier. Okay, so here, let's go ahead and view the details. So what you're going to see is that it's relatively expensive if you look at the per month price. Now with Power BI Premium, it's $5,000 a month, cut and dried, no negotiation. With this, well, I can say I want A1 $750 a month, but I can stop and start the service whenever I want. So if I'm only doing 3 hours a day, I'm going to start the service and basically start working with that. Okay, so now that I've done that, let's go back over here. And so everything here is occurring in a single Azure tenant. That's important, that both the subscription that creates the service and the place that we use it is inside here. Okay, now I created this one a little bit ago, but now you can see that I have a capacity. A second one is now spinning up. And the idea here is that if you have, different workspaces, let's go back to edit this workspace inside there. Well, now I can go and basically put this, into one of these capacities right here. Okay, so what we can do is we can have Power BI embedding using either the Office SKU, which is Power BI embedded, Power BI Premium, or by just going the Azure route and creating an Azure service on demand. Either one will give you a dedicated capacity. Okay, now for dedicated capacities.
Okay, one more time. I'm going to jump in. Vinay was asking, hey, how does it work out on number of refreshes and instances and people views and sessions? How does that work in here, Ted?
Well, there's a lot of details that I would have to go through and that I'm not completely sure about, but let's just kind of start where if you have Power BI Premium, you basically bump up how big your data model can be from 1 gigabyte to 10 gigabytes. If you have Power BI Premium, you bump up how many times you could schedule a refresh a day from 8 to 48. What I don't know is how the numbers, for your Azure-based capacities. So that's what I'm not up to speed on. Okay, but hopefully that'll give you kind of some idea. But one of the main reasons that we want a dedicated capacity is we want to be able to create embed tokens. So if you don't have an embedded capacity or a dedicated capacity, all you can legally do in the licensing terms, is first-party embedding. So if you want to use third-party embedding without Power BI Premium or Power BI Embedded, you can do a little bit of work because now they have some allowance for what they think is reasonable for a developer, but you're not going to be able to start serving up content, to real users, until you have either the dedicated capacity from Power BI Premium or from Power BI Embedded in Azure. Here's a quick look. If you have the Power BI Premium SKUs, they start at $5,000 a month, then they go to $10,000. Chuck, have you seen they have P4s and P5s? They have one that's up to 80 grand a month. I hope you're getting a cut of that, buddy.
I have 5 of them running right now. That's what I look at my manga with.
Okay, I couldn't afford a Tesla, so I just got a Power BI P1 subscription.
There you go.
Okay, there's also EM SKUs. And EM SKUs, I think to some degree, Microsoft kind of put them out and was a little bit regretful because they hadn't pushed out the Azure SKUs yet. But the idea is that you're just going to use embedding and you're not going to have people going through the Power BI service. So don't focus on EM, focus on the one, which is the P SKU. And I'm going to jump over EM and the A SKUs. So what you'll see is that, you can use either one to do third-party embedding. The Azure SKUs, definitely have the benefit of being able to pause and start. Now, note that if you use the Power BI P SKU, you can either do first party or third party. When you move over to Azure, we don't support first party. We only support third party where you have a single master account, what Microsoft is calling the app owns data model. Okay. These things are on the slides. So I think I'm just going to kind of skip through, just leave these things for your reference. One other thing, as far as explaining these, our buddy John White has a great blog post on that. So I just wanted to kind of reference that. Okay, now, one of the things that we have to do as we start working with the Power BI Service API, is to figure out how to authenticate our code against Azure AD. Okay, I mentioned I was going to go through this section pretty quickly, but the idea is that you have to go into Azure, You have to register your application. You're going to get a GUID, which is called a client ID. And then once you think it's the client ID, everyone starts calling it the application ID. Okay, so there's the GUID that has two different names, which is confusing. But we need to take that, and our application needs that to call into the Power BI service. When you register an application in Azure, we can either register them as a web app or a native app. But when we either use console applications or when we use third-party embedding, the app owns data model, we have to use the native app. Okay. Now, the application also gets configured with permissions. So 10,000-foot view is that I go to Azure, I create a new Azure AD application. It would have an application ID, also known as the client ID. It's the same thing. And then I'm going to have to go through and create permissions, so I'm able to go to my application, configure permissions. Note that in Azure AD, we support both application permissions and delegated permissions. The idea of an application permission is that your application authenticates itself, not any user. And the application is given permissions and can use those. Delegated permissions are always associated with a user who has been authenticated. And your app can have delegated permissions, but then you're constrained by what the current user can do. Now, when it comes to Power BI and our programming Power BI Service API, we only have delegated permissions. Hopefully in the future we'll have application permissions, but currently we only have the delegated permissions. And there's this little gotcha. And the gotcha is that the first time a user authenticates and basically wants to use these permissions, they're going to bring up a page that makes the user, grant the permissions or say, I accept. However, when you use Power BI embedding with the app owns data model, typically you log in from server-side code using a username and password. It's what we call direct user credentials. And if the user has not granted permissions, it fails. So there's kind of a motivation to click this button right here, inside of the Azure portal in order to kind of get past that need to authenticate the connection and then grant permissions for the master user account. Okay. Now, with first-party embedding, there's different types of authentication flows. But since we're focused on, third-party embedding, what you're going to see is that we have to use direct user credentials. And we're going to see that in just a second. Now, I want to spend more time on my second application than the first application. I've already demoed this Daily Reporter Pro, but let me just kind of at a high level, talk about how it's created. So you have some code that's going to talk to the Power BI Service API. And so we also have controllers inside of our application. Let's go back here. So note that there's this one class, the Power BI Embedded Manager class, and it's the one that's going to be calling into the Power BI REST API. For instance, let me go ahead and, collapse all this code right here. So as I created this class, and this class, the idea is you have methods, you call it, it calls into the Power BI REST API and gives you what you need. And then other code builds the UI. So we have a kind of a separation of concerns where this doesn't do any UI code. It just knows how to get back the data we need for embedding. Now, there are a bunch of classes that I've created, which are going to be models. And the idea is that when we call the method that calls into the Power BI REST API, we need it to return a set of data for a particular embedding scenario. So that's what all these are inside here. And the big picture is that when I want to do something like get the view for reports, well, we have this entry point, which is a controller action, get reports. And what it's going to do is it's basically going to call into the Power BI REST API, get data it needs. It then is going to return that back to a controller. I've tried to keep the controllers really simple in this demo. And then basically, the work can be done, inside of the views to basically do the work. Now, just to look at a couple other pieces right here, here's code that you have to write to authenticate against Azure Active Directory. If you want to use the Daily Reporter Pro, you just basically need to create an Azure application and get the client ID. Next, you need to basically put things in an app workspace. Remember that if you're working with an app workspace, for instance, I go to this app workspace, you can always just go, into the browser and copy the GUID of the app workspace. It's the one thing behind groups. Also note that if I go to a report or a dashboard or a data set, sometimes you need the GUIDs for a report or a dashboard or a data set. Those are very easy to, copy and paste through the browser as well, which gets to be handy as you're doing various development work. Okay. Now, here's some code to get an access token. Told you I was going to be, pretty brief with that. But let's go ahead, just kind of summarize what you need to program against the Power BI Service API. You basically need the Active Directory Authentication Library, and you need the NuGet package, which is Microsoft.PowerBI.API. Note that when you add that package, it has a dependency on two other packages which are automatically added. The Microsoft.REST.Client Runtime and the Newtonsoft JSON packages, are used by the Power BI API. Note that when you add the Microsoft Power BI API to your project, it doesn't take the latest versions of Microsoft.REST.Client Runtime or Newton.JSON. So I would update those to the very latest versions. Okay, here's just kind of a quick view. If you open up the object browser, you can see that there's quite a few classes that you're going to program against. And note that the namespace that we program in is Microsoft.PowerBI.API.v2. And when you look at the calls that actually go out, they don't have v2 in their URL. They still have v1. So realize that the .NET wrapper around the API, is v2, but the actual REST API itself, still is v1, and v1 is just kind of growing out. Okay. So if I spent some time, drilling into the code in Daily Reporter Pro, I jump into this code and this code. But what I want to do, since I've kind of talked through this application earlier, is to move to something that I've just written that hopefully will kind of give everyone some traction to start getting, more productive. So what I want to do is I want to focus on embeddable resources. So I can embed a report. I can embed a dashboard. I can embed a dashboard tile. Two of the new things I'm going to show today is you can actually import a report visual, just a single visual, not the whole report. And also we can embed the Q&A experience, the question and answer, what people call natural language Q&A. Okay, so let's go ahead, and in my demo, what I'm going to show is a lot of client-side code and then a little bit of server-side code as well. So when you want to create a embed token, remember that the embed token is much more narrow. You never want to pass back just the Azure AD token for the master user account back to the browser. That would be a, not a very secure way to do things. So when you create an embed token, the token's only good for one report or one dashboard. Okay, so we're going to see a lot of code that is going to generate a token request, and then basically it's going to get back the embed token inside there. Okay, now let's kind of move through here and talk about embedding with the JavaScript API. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and move over to a demo application. And this demo application is called the Power BI Embedded Scratchpad. Now, one of the things that is always hard to get around is that you have to have some kind of server-side technology, whether it's ASP.NET or whether you use web forms or whether you use Node.js. So what I wanted to do is just basically see the HTML and client-side code and be able to work directly on that. So there's this proof of concept application that I've created. So here I have a embed report.html file. And the idea is I have a page template. And so here I have some placeholders. So I'm going to run some server-side code and get things like the report ID, the embed URL, and the access token. Note that when we actually do some embedding, we're going to create this special object called the config object. And then we're going to basically give it a type, report, dashboard, tile. And when we do that, we're then going to call into the Power BI embed. Okay, now let's see how to use this application. Okay, now, first of all, you're going to have to go to one file and just put in your details. So if I go into models and Power BI Embedded Manager, what you're going to see here is that you're going to add your data here for things like the client ID and the workspace ID and the data set. Okay, now I realize I'm now in the project that I put into GitHub where I took all that off. So now let me go back into my demo folder. And so now let's go ahead and open up the Scratchpad where all these details are set inside here. And I'm going to go here. Now, what's going to happen? Let's just go ahead and run the first one. What is going to happen is some code makes a server-side call and basically gets the data that we need to do embedding. And then it brings it back and it parses that data into an HTML page. And then the last thing it does is it basically fires up that HTML page inside here. Okay, so let's say that I go back here and I go back to demo and I go back to embedded pages. Let me go ahead and delete. So the way the demo works is that you are going to pick a place on your hard drive where these pages are going to be created. Let's run this one more time. And what you're going to see is it creates the page and then it brings it up in Chrome app mode. There's a little bit of code here. So, when you kind of change it, it's kind of changing the size of the div. But now what I like about this, let's go ahead and open this up. So I'll generate things with Visual Studio, but then I'll kind of monkey around with Visual Studio Code. So you can see what my code does is it basically calls in and gets the report ID, the embed URL, and the access token. Okay, just real quickly, let's say that I go back here and I have embedded data models. So what do we need for a report? We need the report ID. We need the report name. The report name is actually optional. I'm just kind of using that to put a friendly title on my page. But the report ID, the embed URL, and the access token are all going to be important. So if we look inside here and we look at this method right here, you can see it's calling into the Power BI API, get report in group. Notice that in group means in an app workspace. And so once I get the report, I can scrape things like the embed URL. I've got the name inside here. Okay. Note that when you use this application, you are basically going and finding one report, one dashboard, and one data set. So I just kind of have things hard coded inside here. But the idea is it then can get the information we need, and we need an embed token. So pretty much everything in this demo is third party, where we're using embed tokens, not Azure AD tokens, except where I explicitly call it out, with something like this, where you see it's just first party. Okay, now let's go back here and take another look at this report right here. So you see that my code basically just kind of fills in the details. And then down here, I can basically just work with this inside here pretty easy. What's really neat about this is, let's go back. There's an embed token in this page. So this page is good for an hour. I can basically open it up and let's go ahead and kind of see how it initializes inside here. And after a second, we should see it initializes just fine. And it finally comes to life. And if I do something such as go back here, maybe I don't want view mode, I want edit mode. Make a change, save my change, go back and refresh the page. And you get kind of a more instant gratification, just because now we can work entirely with HTML and programming against the JavaScript API. We've kind of abstracted away, a lot of other things behind this. Okay, so now that you've seen that, let's go ahead and test out a couple more things. So in our case right here, let's go ahead and the next thing that we're going to test out back here, we'll go back to program and I'm going to get through as many of these demos as I can. Okay, so let's say that I want a page, with first-party embedding. Well, the only difference is if I go back and we take a look here, if I look at the first one inside here, which is get report, I basically am creating a embed token. However, the second one right here, I'm just basically returning the access token that I got when I authenticated the master user account. I pass that back here, and really the only difference that you're going to see is that we still have the access token, but here you either put AAD if it's an Azure access token, or you put embed, if it's the right one. Okay, let's say I go ahead and save this here. I go ahead and save this work. Once I save this work, I go, well, I have to run this once. So let me go ahead and run it. And, as I run this, we're going to see that I've got things a little bit mixed up because I've passed an access token, yet I've told the JavaScript API that this is a embed token. Okay, so this comes up, it tries to create things, and I told you it would break. And it's one of the worst things that you can do in training is to say you're going to fail, but then fail to fail. Okay, but if I go back here to our first party embedding, and let's make sure I'm calling the right thing inside here. Okay, anyway, I'm going to keep moving there. I'm getting tripped up on something esoteric, and Chuck tells me that I have to finish on time. So the next thing we'll look at is we're creating this report.
You have to finish on time, Ted. Yes.
I have to finish on time. So let's have a toolbar. So in our case right here, let's go ahead and open this one up inside here. And, what we're going to see with this one right here is that I'm going to go ahead and open this with code. So here, what I've done is I put a little toolbar up top here. I put two little buttons. Okay. Now, also, I've got this toggle click. Now, when I create the report, you can see that I call Power BI embed and I get the report back. That is a JavaScript object. And here I've got something where I'm going to click this button. And this basically just kind of toggles me back and forth, between edit mode and view mode inside there. So just kind of emphasizing that your code lives outside of the iframe, but the report object that hands back to you has simple methods that you call, and it basically is able to call back, into the iframe and control that inside there. Okay, there's also a full screen. Note that if you want to take your app, and put it into a full screen mode, that gets to be very easy. All you have to do, is call report.fullscreen. Okay. Also note that when you are creating this config object, one of the new things that they've added is a extension where you can add commands inside there. So the idea here is if I go back to my report, and I drop this down inside there, you're able to add your own commands, and you're able to basically, have something fire outside of your code. For instance, let's go ahead and do a Control-Shift-I, and now I have this back here. And so if I now go and, call on this, what you can see, and then also just for completeness, let's go back and right click on that. So we have two kinds of commands that we can add in, and as you add these commands inside here, the way that you handle them is by saying report on, and you're going to handle a specific event called command triggered. So here, all I'm doing is logging to the console, but I'm going to pass the command inside there, just to kind of show you when the command comes, you get to figure out what control was it, and all kinds of other contextual information can be discovered. Okay, let's see. I got 15 minutes, or you told me I have to stop 1 minute short. So I got 14 minutes left. Let's keep going through here. So the next thing we want to look at is let's create a new report. Now, when I want to create a new report, I need the workspace, but I don't need a report ID. I need the dataset ID of the dataset I want to build on top of. I need an embed URL, and I need an access token. So over here, let's go ahead and say, I need the data for a new report. So here is an example here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. But what you're going to see here is that I'm creating a generate token request with the access level equals create. And when I do that, I have to pass a name parameter, which is the dataset ID. Now, once I've created that embed token, I'm now going to return that back. We're going to parse that in place right there. So let's go ahead and run this right here. So what you can see here, when this thing finally starts up, is that it creates a brand new report, and it basically gives it to the user. And now the user is able to basically start doing things, such as, let's go to the calendar. Let's go ahead and pick on year. And after we pick on year, we'll go ahead and add in sales revenue. Okay, now this all works very well. Let's go back here. Let's look at the new report. You can see the kind of information that we needed up here. And you can see the config object is pretty straight ahead. Dataset, access type, and we're using the embed token inside there. Okay, now the problem with this sample is that it allows a user to create a new report, but if the user comes back here and hits save, we'll say something like Waldo was here, you basically save the report, but you don't move the user to the new report. The user's still on a blank report. Okay, the heck are you talking about, Ted? Let's go back here and go to Power BI Embedded. Let's go back to My App Workspace and look at reports. And what you're going to see is that, you created a report, but you didn't really move the user over into that new report. So let's look at a follow-up in this demo. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to actually save this new report. Now, here's a demo where I'm going to switch over to first party because I need to do two things that each require an embed token, and it would require another server-side call. So just to simplify things, I've moved over to first-party embedding so we can use one access token for the whole thing. Now, if we take a look at this code right here, so let's go back here to new report. And now, let's see. Okay, let me move back over, make sure this runs properly. And what did I do incorrect here? I got this working before. Got 11 minutes left, got plenty of time here. So let's go back and kind of take a look at this, which we're going to get the new report first party. I look at this and I'm just basically passing back the access token inside there. If I look at the page generator, so new report with first party embedding, okay, we're passing that back correctly. We're passing the embed token, the access token. Okay, and then finally, if I look at the new report first party and look down here, not seeing exactly. Okay, unfortunately, this might not work out as I would have hoped. I'll try this one more time to see if somehow it will work out, but I will kind of step through the code right here. So if we go to the first party embedding, okay, and now I realize that the proper code is not in there. Okay, I am sorry, but I have let you down with that demo. But the idea is that you have to respond to the saved as event. Well, now, actually, here's the code right here. So we're going to say report on saved. And the idea is that when it gets saved, we can respond to that. So even though this code's not working, what we're going to do is we've just saved a report. And so we have this event fire, and I can figure out what the report's ID is for the new report. Okay. And then once we get that, and here's my problem right here. Oh, okay. Don't do this at home. Let's try this one more time. So I'm using kind of the embed token the whole time. Okay, so now we can actually see exactly, how things are going to work. So I go back here, I pick one, I pick two, and now it's time to save the report. I'm going to come down here and let's go ahead and call this one Dino. And when I click on this code's going to fire. So first of all, I'll kind of log the detail inside there, but also we'll get the ID. And now what we want to do is we want to take the container, which now holds the new report, and reset it. And now we're going to go ahead and load the new report inside there. So once again, I go ahead and call save. You can see that we've changed the title, and now we're basically, in the correct report. So that, as we start, working with the report there, let's go back over here. You can see that I've created, you're not continuing to create new reports as you choose save as. Okay. Now, next thing we're going to look at is getting a dashboard. And let's do a couple. Let's do dashboards and tiles together. So let's go ahead and run those right here. And what you're going to see, with dashboards and tiles is that there are, pretty straight ahead models. So here is looking at a dashboard. Here is looking at a single tile. And if I go back inside here, and we now kind of look at the, this particular dashboard right here. If I want a dashboard, there's the dashboard ID, there's the URL, and you have things like, fit to width or actual size. Okay, if I look at the one that does the tile, let's go ahead and open that up with code. So what you'll see here is that there is a type tile. When you create tiles, you can put the width and height inside there. For instance, if I all of a sudden, wanted this to be bigger, here's one of kind of the nice aspects, of working with the Scratchpad application, is I can just kind of open that HTML page, make a save, come back here, hit the F5 key to refresh, just to basically, see the changes inside there. Okay, so now you've just seen those two. We've saved the best to last. So what I want to show this time is a drill down, into visuals. So let me go ahead and move back here to Visual Studio. And so what we're going to do here is let's get rid of these two. And now I'm going to bring up something which is called the Page Inspector. Now, the Page Inspector is going to allow us to handle an event, and it's going to tell us what visuals are on the page inside here. So the way that this is going to work, let's go back here and open this up. So this is the Report Inspector. And so the Report Inspector basically binds a report, but then what we're going to do is we're going to handle the loaded event. So after the report finally loads into the iframe, you have an event handler. And what you're able to do is you can call report.getPages. And that returns basically a promise, and I'm going to call then on that promise. Now, what happens is it calls a function and passes me the individual report pages. Now, when I get each individual report, I can call this method, which is called getVisuals. And now what my code is doing is taking every single visual from every page and basically showing you what the display name is, what the programmatic name is, and what the type is. So back over here, you can basically see that, I have this one page, sales by geography. You have, this set of visuals inside, and you can see, what type each visual is. Okay, now with that, we're kind of two more things we're going to look at. And so let's go back here. And this time we want to look at how do we embed a single visual? And the answer is you don't really embed a single visual. You embed the entire report, so everything gets loaded, but then you're able to customize the page layout and hide all the visuals that you don't want to show. And you're also able to take visuals and kind of change them around. Okay, so what does the real report look like? The real report looks like this. So how do we get this worked out? So back here, if we now look at this report visual, what we're going to do is we're going to have a custom layout. So under settings, and now I have layout type equals custom. I can have a custom page size, but now here is the pages layout section. Now pages are given names like report section 1, 2, and 3. Wherever the heck these visual names come from, I'm not sure, but they're either created by the browser or Power BI desktop when you add them into reports. And the only way, that I found to get them, is to create this little inspector, so I can basically take the names and copy and paste them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the visuals and we're going to change them around. If you do nothing with a visual, it basically just shows it and puts it where we want it to go. In this case right here, I basically want to take two visuals and not show them. So if I didn't do anything, it would show. But now I've taken the first visual and put it in the X and Y, at, let's go back over here, at 0, 0. We've now taken, some other things inside there. Let's say that, for the page width, we want the page width to be 1200. We want the height to be 400 inside here. So now we'll come back here and we'll kind of stick with, since we have 800 in height, well, let's go ahead and put that one at 800. Let's go ahead and put this one, at the 400 start point, and same width. And this one is now going to be 200 inside. We'll go ahead and hit save. And now I'll come back here and refresh. So what you'll see is that you have complete control. And, not only can you define the layout in this JSON right here, but programmatically, you can create a layout and apply it so that someone can just click a button and move from page layout 1 that shows one visual to page layout 2 that shows another visual. And it's lightning fast because everything is already loaded in. So pretty neat stuff. Okay. Now, Chuck, I know that you said that we have to finish. What do we have now? We have 90 seconds. We have 120 seconds.
120, I think it is. Hey, one other question that I promised somebody like 20 minutes ago. Do you know when you enumerate data sets and reports, if you only get the list that you have access to, or do you get the entire list? And is there any way to actually go out and filter them on whether or not a particular user has access to that report? So like in your Daily Reporter Pro sample, you actually show a list of reports. Are you enumerating that in real time, or you actually statically putting them? And if you're enumerating them, are you only seeing the ones you have access to?
If you enumerate them, you only see the ones you have access to.
Okay, I didn't know that.
There are scenarios where you're going to put a GUID that the user won't have access to. So basically, you're able to have free users get pro content. That gets a little bit involved. But the last thing I want to show here, and then we'll break, and I think I can pull this off in just a couple seconds, is that we have the embedded Q&A mode. So I can also embed Q&A. So I come back here and you can see that, as Q&A lights up the screen, you can bring this up here and, sales revenue by state, and, what else, gender inside there. You can see how that works. And then also just going one more step here. Let's say that instead of just bringing up the thing in interactive mode, let me seed Q&A mode, with a question. Let's go ahead and hit save. Let's go ahead, and I think this one will, be my very last test here. Let's go ahead and run this inside, and you can see that it automatically builds out the report for you. Okay, so I think I'm going to hand it back to you, Chuck, so you can finish off right at the closing time.
There's tons and tons of questions on licensing, my least favorite topic in the world, but I think I've gotten most of those. The URLs for your GitHub and your sample wouldn't go into YouTube, so I had to get shortened versions of those. I think we got those out. Otherwise, I want to thank Todd. Todd Brzezinski was our on there actually helping out. Rob Francis, Kevin, Vinay, lots and lots of people. Actually, we had 135 people, I think, at our high water mark. So I want to thank all of those guys for joining us. Otherwise, please do actually come out to the Microsoft Data Insight Summit and Ted's training. He actually has lots of open sessions like you can see right here. And again, I've seen lots and lots of trainers, and Ted is certainly the best, or one of the very, very best in the development space for Power BI. Ted, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Dublin in a couple of weeks, my friend.
Thank you, sir.